Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back. Okay, in the second part of the video, we shall learn about several types of exception. Okay, as we have seen in the previous demo, we know that exceptions are represented by an object. Okay, and these objects are actually defined by using classes. For example, like you have seen in the previous example, arithmetic exception, input mismatch, and so on. So those are an example of exception classes. So the root class for exception is called java.lang trouble. So trouble is the root class for exception. So in general, we can classify exception into three types. First one, system errors. Second one, exceptions. And the third one, runtime exceptions. Okay, so this diagram shows the hierarchy of exception. So if you see, the whole of classes is actually inherited from trouble class. So trouble class has two subclasses, exception and error. And as you can see here, exception contains a number of subclasses. Yeah, and what we have seen in the previous demo is this arithmetic exception. So this is actually a subclass of runtime exception. So we're going to see each of these types. So system errors or errors class, yeah, are thrown by Java virtual machines and represented in this error class. So what happens is that it helps describes internal system errors, yeah, and such errors rarely occur. However, if it occurs, there is nothing much we could do, and normally the program will terminate. For example, if there is error such as linkage error or virtual machine error, or errors such as out of memory, yeah, or stack overflow. So those are system error that we can't do much to handle it. So the other type of error, yeah, is called exception. So this describes errors caused by your program and external circumstances. So this is a kind of error that might happen because of your program logic, for instance. Yeah, but especially for this runtime exception. So this type of error can be handled by our program, because if we did not handle, normally it will incur, the program will terminate. Yeah. So as you can see here, exception contains several classes, right? Such as class not found exception, IO exception, the class that deal with input output. Yeah, for instance, this class will be used if there is an error related to file usage. For example, if you try to open a file that is not exist something, so it will give you an error message from this class. Okay, and runtime is the typical one that I'm sure that some of you are familiar with these errors. Yeah, last time if you have used array, you might notice that you have got this error, index out of bound exceptions. Yeah, this is an error where you are referring to an array element that is not exist. Yeah, and null pointer exception. Yeah, for instance, if you try to refer to an object that does not exist. Yeah, and arithmetic exception as we have seen in the previous demo. So runtime exception is common. And this is actually due to logic error or programming errors, yeah, as I mentioned, or backcasting, accessing out of bound arrays, memory errors, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot more classes under this particular class. Okay, and now there are some terminologies related to exceptions. You might have discovered this checked exception or unchecked exceptions. So what are they? So those categories of exceptions can be further broken down into two kinds of exceptions. The first one is unchecked, and the second one is checked. So what is unchecked and checked? So unchecked exception refers to these classes: runtime exceptions, error, and their subclasses. Okay, those are unchecked exceptions. And the other exceptions are known as checked exceptions. So the checked exceptions, like for example IO exception, we as a programmer, we need to deal with the exceptions. So actually our duty is actually to handle exceptions only for errors that occur other than runtime error and error, because system error we can't do anything. Okay. Okay, this is what I have mentioned just now. So the unchecked exceptions, consists of the runtime exception class as well as system errors class, because these two classes are typically we are aware of, the kind of error. For instance, if runtime exception, typically because of the logic error. So as a programmer, you should rectify the program, to avoid such error. For example, in our program, if it's involve array, make sure that it is within the size allowed. Okay. Or if you conduct an arithmetic operation, make sure that there is no arithmetic issue exception, such as division by 0 kind of thing. So these are unchecked exception classes where, as a programmer, we do not need to deal it, so it's fine. The rest, the other classes of exceptions, such as IO exceptions, class not found exception, this exception, and others other than runtime exception, we have to deal with it. This is what we call as checked exception. Okay. So unchecked exceptions can occur anywhere in a program, and because it might be cumbersome, to always use try and catch block, so Java does not mandate you to write code to catch unchecked exceptions. Okay, so it is expected that, because unchecked exception is typically due to programming logic errors, so it is expected that we should be able to carefully check the logic of our codes. Alright, so I hope to get it. Okay, this is the typical process, of declaring, throwing, and catching exceptions. And in the sample code that you have seen before, you have seen the try and catch block, and also you have seen an example using throw statement. Okay, so what happened here is that typically in a method, for us to handle an exception, at the very least we need to have this try and catch block. Okay, but in a situation where you want to write a method, in such a way that this method might potentially produce error. So in this case, you can actually write this method such a way that it will throw an exception. So you can write something like this: method throws exception. Okay, and in this code, in this method, somewhere in this method, you will have this kind of statement. You will throw a new exception object. So when this occur, and this will only occur when there is an error. Okay, so whenever error occur, what happens is that it will return to the caller. Okay, for example here, in this method, it invokes method 2, and let's say an error occur. So this particular method will produce an exception object. It will throw that exception object to the caller. So this caller will be responsible to process the error. So how it process? It can simply execute the statements that you have specified in the catch block over here. Okay. So every method must state the types of check exceptions that you might throw. So this is an example of how you can declare exceptions at a method level. Yeah, you do this only if you want your method to throw exceptions, and you can specify one or more than one exceptions object that possibly could occur, yeah, from this method. So remember that you can declare exceptions at the method level only if the method will potentially produce such errors. Okay, so in the method, yeah, where you throw an exception, so you typically will have this kind of statement: throw new exception. Yeah, so when this statement, when there is an error occur, this statement will be executed in the method. I think we have seen this now in the previous part where, yeah, not this one. Which example did I show you this? This one. Okay, you see this statement, yeah? So you can either declare at the method level, or you can throw it, yeah? Throw the exception object, and this exception object will be catched, yeah, by this particular block, catch block. Alright? Okay. So this is another example on how you can declare exception, yeah, at the method, as well as throwing the exception. For example, in this case, if you want to set the radius, and if let's say the radius is less than 0, which is not possible, so you will throw this particular error, illegal argument exception, and you can put a message, for example, radius cannot be negative, right? So when an exception is thrown, it can be caught and handled in a try-catch block, yeah, as usual. And in a try statement, in a try statement, you can actually have a number of catch, yeah, block. This is fine. So for instance, if let's say whatever that you have in this try block might probably produce a different kind of errors. So those errors will need to be handled by different kind of exception objects. Okay, so that's why you need to have different types of catch. Okay, and let's have a look at this example. Test circle with exception. Okay, so you can see in this particular code, you create a circle with exception class. So there are three objects being created from this class. And let's have a look at that circle with exception. Circle with exception. Okay, this is the one. So for example, if let's say you are creating a, let's say, -5, yeah. So calling the constructor will actually call to this radius method. So calling to this radius method, if let's say the radius value is less than 0, yeah, it will throw this error, and this error will be handled by this particular catch block. Okay, so I hope you get some knowledge about this exception from this part. Okay, we will continue to the next part, inshallah.